All right. So, you know how sometimes you get this like weird feeling and you just can't shake it that you've like done something before or been somewhere before, even though you know you haven't.
Yeah, like that feeling of deja vu, right?
Exactly. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, what if there's more to our memories than we realize?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. Ancestral memory.
Ooh, yeah. Ancestral memory. So we're talking about like the idea that maybe we're carrying around bits and pieces of our ancestors' experiences tucked away in our genes.
You got it. And you know what's really cool about this topic? It like totally challenges how we think about memory itself. Like, can you imagine inheriting fears or talents from people you never even met?
It's wild, right?
You might.
It makes you question like everything you thought you knew about nature versus nurture. It's like, are we really just a blank slate when we're born? Or are we carrying around all this hidden baggage, history from our ancestors?
Well, and that's what we're going to try to figure out today. We've got some pretty amazing stories and some cutting edge science to unpack. So we're going to try to help you sift through it all and, come to your own conclusions.
Exactly. We're not here to tell you what to believe. We just want to lay out the evidence and let you decide for yourself.
Right on.
So one of the sources we dug up is this blog post called Ancestral Memory. Is it fact or fiction? And it's full of these personal stories that'll make you wonder if there's something more going on.
Oh, yeah. Some of these stories are pretty mind-blowing. Like there's one about this woman named Monique who lands in Ireland for the first time. And she's immediately hit with this like overwhelming feeling of belonging, like she's finally home. And this years later, she does a DNA test. And what do you know? She discovers deep ancestral roots in that very location.
It's like something out of a movie, right?
Yeah.
And there are others too, like Lynn Christensen, who says she feels most at peace in England and Denmark, which happen to be the homelands of her parents and ancestors. But you know, the one that really grabbed me was Beth's story.
Oh, yeah. Beth's story is wild. So she moves to this new city and instantly she feels like she's been there before. Super strong deja vu, right?
Totally.
And then later she finds out that her father actually studied there years earlier. It's like she's tapping into his memory somehow.
Right. Like, how do you explain that? And there's another one about this woman, Gina Locke, who had this like premonition of dying in this place she had never even heard of, Ashby-de-la-Zouch. And guess what? Years later, she ends up moving just 20 minutes away from that spot.
Spooky way.
It's definitely a little eerie. But you know, as fascinating as these stories are, they don't really offer like concrete proof. But what's really exciting is that there's actual science emerging that could explain how ancestral memory might actually work. And that's where epigenetics comes in.
Okay, so epigenetics. I've heard this word thrown around, but I'm not really sure I understand it. Can you break it down for us?
Totally. So we all know that our genes, our DNA plays a huge role in like who we are, right? Yeah. But what if there's more to the story?
I'm listening. So imagine your DNA as like a book. Okay, the words are the genes. But then you've got these things called epigenetic tags, and those are like little notes scribbled in the margins.
I like that analogy.
And these notes can actually change how the words are read, like how your genes actually function. And get this, those notes can be passed down through generations.
So it's like our experiences can leave a mark on our DNA, and those marks can be inherited.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about theoretical possibilities here. There's actually research that shows this happening. One of our sources, an article called Can You Inherit Memories from Your Ancestors? Yeah. Highlights some really groundbreaking work by this guy, Professor Kerry Ressler.
Right. Let's hear about this research. This is where things get really juicy.
Okay, so Ressler and his team did this study with mice. And they trained these mice to fear a specific smell by pairing it with an electric shock. So basically, they gave them a phobia of cherry-like smells.
Okay.
And here's the crazy part. Their children and even their grandchildren inherited the same phobia, even though they had never been shocked themselves.
Whoa, wait a minute. So even though the offspring, the grandkids, had never experienced the trauma, they still inherited the fear response.
That's exactly right. And it really makes you think, right? Like, what if our own experiences, the things that we go through, can impact future generations in ways we never even imagined?
It's incredible and a little bit scary, to be honest. Like, if trauma can be inherited, what about other things? Like, could resilience or creativity or even like a love of music be passed down as well?
Those are great questions. And you know what? Researchers are actually exploring those possibilities right now. The field of epigenetics is still pretty young,
right,
but the discoveries that they're making are totally revolutionizing how we think about inheritance and the whole nature versus nurture debate.
It's mind-blowing stuff. And it makes you wonder about those stories we talked about earlier, right? Like Monique and Beth and Gina. Could epigenetics be the explanation for what they experienced?
Well, it's certainly possible, right? But before we jump to conclusions, let's dig into some more research because there's another study that I think you're going to find really interesting.
Okay, lay it on me. I'm ready for more.
So this one involves Holocaust survivors and their children.
Yep.
And it was done by this researcher, Professor Rachel Yehuda. And you know what they found?
Right.
The descendants of Holocaust survivors had specific epigenetic changes. And these changes weren't just random. They were affecting genes related to stress and immunity. So, there's a direct link between the trauma experienced by the survivors and the biological makeup of their children.
So it's not just like a vague sense of inherited trauma. There's actually evidence at the genetic level.
Exactly. And the implications of this are pretty huge. It means that trauma can literally be woven into our DNA. And that can impact not just our own lives, but potentially the lives of our kids and grandkids as well.
Whoa, that is heavy stuff. But it's also incredibly fascinating. And it makes me wonder what other kinds of experiences could leave an epigenetic mark on our genes. Like if trauma can be inherited, what about positive things?
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are actively exploring right now. The field of epigenetics is still relatively young, but it's already making some amazing discoveries that are changing how we understand who we are and where we come from. And you know what else is really interesting is the role that photographs play in all of this.
Photographs?
Yeah, photographs. Because, they're not just capturing moments in time, they're actually triggering memories and connecting us to previous generations.
Yeah, that's a good point. We actually have an article here called Photographs Are Our Memory Holders, and it talks about how photos can actually help us tap into our past.
Yeah.
Even if we weren't there ourselves, like there are these tangible windows into another time.
Exactly. And you know what's crazy? The author shares a story about her daughter's earliest memory. And it was actually sparked by looking at photos and videos. It makes you realize just how powerful those visual cues can be.
Especially for young children, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's not just about our own personal memories either. Photographs give us glimpses into the lives of our ancestors, which allows us to connect with them on a much deeper level.
It's like suddenly we can see them as real people, not just names in a family tree. And that connection can be so powerful. It helps us understand our family narrative, the events that shaped our lineage, and ultimately who we are today.
And speaking of connecting with the past, the article also talks about the impact of colorizing old black and white photographs and how it can bring the past to life in a whole new way. The author mentions her father seeing his parents' wedding photo in color for the first time and how emotional it was for him.
Wow. That must have been amazing to see your parents like that in full color. It's like they're suddenly right there in front of you.
It's like a whole new dimension of memory is unlocked. And that's what's so fascinating about photographs. They're not just collections of images, they're repositories of stories, traditions, and experiences that have been passed down through generations.
Yeah, it's like each photograph is a piece of a larger puzzle. And when you put them all together, you start to see a bigger picture of your family history.
And that picture, that collective memory, can be incredibly influential. It shapes our values, our beliefs, even our sense of identity. Think about those old family photo albums. They're not just collections of images. They're like time capsules filled with memories and emotions. They're like portals to the past.
It makes you wonder if there's a connection between those individual memories triggered by photos and the idea of a collective unconscious, like Jung talked about. Could these personal memories somehow tap into a deeper well of ancestral experience?
That's a question that has fascinated thinkers for centuries. Is there like a reservoir of shared memories and archetypes that we all draw from? It's a tantalizing idea, but one that's difficult to prove scientifically.
Yeah, it's not like you could just hook someone up to a brain scanner and measure their ancestral memories.
Yeah, exactly. But even if we can't definitively prove the existence of a collective unconscious, the idea itself is pretty thought-provoking. It suggests that we're all connected in ways we may not fully understand, bound together by shared experiences and inherited memories.
Okay, so we've explored the anecdotal evidence, we delved into the science of epigenetics, and we've considered the power of photographs to bridge the gap between past and present. But what does it all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about all of this?
Well, for one, it invites you to reconsider the nature of memory itself. We often think of memories as purely individual, locked away in our own minds. But what if our memories are more fluid, more interconnected than we realize? What if they're shaped not just by our own experiences, but also by the experiences of those who came before us?
That's a pretty radical idea, isn't it? It's like maybe we're not just carrying around our own personal baggage, but also echoes of our ancestors' baggage as well.
And if that's the case, it could have profound implications for how you understand yourself and your place in the world. It could help you explain certain fears, behaviors, even talents that you may have inherited from your ancestors.
Right. Like maybe that inexplicable fear of spiders you have isn't just random. Maybe it's a memory passed down from a distant ancestor who had a negative encounter with an eight-legged friend.
Exactly. Or maybe your natural musical ability isn't just a fluke, but rather a gift inherited from a musically inclined great-grandparent.
So understanding ancestral memory could help you unlock hidden talents or confront deep-seated fears.
Precisely. It could also lead to new approaches to healing trauma. If we can understand how trauma is passed down through generations, maybe we can develop more effective therapies to break those cycles and promote healing. This could have profound implications for fields like psychology and psychotherapy.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. But beyond the individual level, understanding ancestral memory could also have implications for society as a whole, right?
Absolutely. If we recognize that we're all connected by shared experiences and inherited memories, it could foster greater empathy and understanding between individuals and groups.
That's so important, especially in today's world where there's so much division and conflict. Maybe if we could tap into that sense of shared history, that collective memory, we could start to bridge some of those divides.
Precisely. It could also inspire us to be more mindful of the legacy we're leaving for future generations. If we understand that our actions today can have ripple effects far into the future, it could motivate us to make more responsible choices to create a better world for our descendants.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from personal anecdotes and scientific research to the broader societal implications of ancestral memory. But before we wrap up this episode, I want to circle back to some of those intriguing stories we discussed earlier. We talked about Monique's experience in Ireland, but the blog post also mentions other compelling accounts.
Yes, there were a few that we didn't get to explore in detail.
Right, like this story of Pat Blake, who felt this overwhelming sense of coming home when she landed in the Isle of Man as a child. Years later, she discovered through genealogical research that her great-grandmother was actually from the Isle of Man.
It's quite remarkable how those deep-seated feelings align with later discoveries about ancestral connections.
Totally. And then there's Gina Locke's story, which adds a whole other layer to this exploration. Remember, she had that premonition of dying in Ashby-de-la-Zouch. Well, years later, she ended up moving just 20 minutes away from that very place.
Now, that's a story that really makes you wonder about the nature of premonitions and whether they could be linked to ancestral experiences or perhaps even a form of ancestral foresight.
It's definitely a bit eerie, right? Was it just a coincidence or was there some deeper connection at play?
It's a question that's difficult to answer definitively, but it certainly adds another layer of intrigue to this whole exploration of ancestral memory.
So we've got personal accounts that range from feelings of belonging to premonitions, and we've got emerging science that suggests a possible mechanism for how these experiences could be transmitted across generations. What a fascinating and complex topic this is. But I think it's time to turn things over to you for a final synthesis of what we've learned today. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into ancestral memory?
Well, it's clear that while we might not have all the answers yet, the evidence for ancestral memory is pretty compelling. We've got those personal stories, those intriguing anecdotes, the groundbreaking research in epigenetics, and the undeniable power of photographs to evoke memories and connect us to our past.
Right. It's like we're looking at this puzzle from all these different angles, and the pieces seem to fit even if we're not sure what the complete picture looks like yet.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of science and exploration, isn't it? There's always more to discover. But I think it's safe to say that ancestral memory is more than just a whimsical idea. It's a real possibility that deserves our attention and our curiosity.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What can you, the listener, do with all of this information? What do we do with all this stuff?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay curious. Explore your own family history. Listen to the stories that have been passed down through generations. You might be surprised by what you uncover.
I know I'm definitely feeling inspired to dig into my own family tree after this deep dive. Who knows what secrets or hidden connections I might find.
Yeah, and pay attention to those intuitive feelings you get, that sense of familiarity in a place you've never been before, or that unexplained pull towards a certain activity or skill. Those could be whispers from your ancestors trying to tell you something.
I love that. It's like tuning into a different frequency. opening ourselves up to the possibility that we're carrying more than just our own individual experiences. Like we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Precisely. And even if we can't definitively prove the existence of ancestral memory, the very act of exploring these ideas can enrich our lives. It can deepen our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. It can help us connect with our past and perhaps even inspire us to create a more meaningful future.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating and mysterious world of ancestral memory, we want to leave you with one final thought.
Hmm.
What if, by understanding the experiences of those who came before us, we could unlock the potential within ourselves and shape a better world for generations to come? It's something to ponder, isn't it? Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery, and remember, keep diving deep.